Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to TLC Academy. Today we have a presenter named Sharon McCarthy, who is one of our caregivers in the field. And Sharon has brought to us some information today about unconventional grief, a very important concept that a lot of us don't spend much time thinking about. So today we welcome Sharon and the information she's providing, and with that I'll turn the table over to her.
Thank you. Yes, today we're speaking about unconventional grief, what it is and how to cope. Sometimes referred to as ambiguous grief. Some of the information that I will be sharing is from the American Academy of Bereavement. This type of grief is unique in that it is grieving someone who is still alive. But because of circumstances beyond their control or your control, it is as if they have died. They are no longer the person that you knew, meaning the person that you knew no longer exists. There is an incredible sadness and loss that occurs as a result. And it is often confusing and devastating and very difficult to come to terms with. Excuse me. Grieving someone alive is not a conventional form of grief that is often talked about, but it is a real issue that is faced by the living. Death is often viewed as the base requirement for grief, but mourning the deceased is only one facet of death. If you've never experienced this, then it is likely you do not understand what we are talking about. How can you grieve for someone who you have not lost? If you have experienced this, you probably are cheering inside that someone has finally put to words what you are feeling, because the reality is you have lost them. And it is like a death, except there was no way to acknowledge or work it through. Grieving for someone alive is not the same as anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is the type of grief that comes when you know that you will soon be experiencing a loss, such as when a loved one is dying or in the hospital. This you can prepare for and grieve appropriately. Why unconventional grief happens. Excuse me. If you are not familiar with this form of grief, you may be unsure how this is possible, or what often triggers this form of grief in people. This form of grief is caused by a loved one becoming someone that you no longer know or recognize. Common causes of unconventional grief: mental illness, drug or substance addiction, dementia or Alzheimer's, brain injury, family trauma, or which is physical or emotional. The unfortunate truth of grieving someone alive is that they are still there physically as the person you once knew, but psychologically they are a different person than they were before. Also, a lot of these factors are outside of the control of the person experiencing them or the person who is watching their loved one suffer. It can be hard for either person to recognize because the person does not always look like they are sick. Don't look at these causes and think that they mean you love this person any less. Although your reality changes, this level of grief, just like grieving someone deceased, does not change the level of attachment to that person. Simply, this person is no longer acting how they were before and have had a dramatic shift in personality. If your brother is suffering from drug addiction, his behavior may become erratic and he might start stealing from yourself or family members. Some will grieve the life he's not living while focusing on his addictions. Excuse me. If someone is dealing with a mental illness, they may now be dealing with depression so badly that they are unable to go on living their life, or they may be experiencing delusions or hallucinations. A person will experience many emotions while grieving someone alive. These emotions may be more powerful and more confusing than the grieving process for someone who has recently passed. This is very true. Anger is a prominent emotion that shows up. The grieving individual could feel anger toward their loved one for the issues that they are dealing with and may have a hard time understanding that they may not be able to change. Eventually experience compassion fatigue. They would be experiencing compassion fatigue. Then there's the guilt, because you find it hard to be compassionate at times due to frustration and anger at not being able to control or change the situation. Unlike when someone dies, you are unlikely to experience positive emotions while grieving someone alive. When someone passes, you are surrounded by the comfort of their loved ones, and often are able to look at the joy of their life. This rarely happens with unconventional or ambiguous grief. This is the sadness. Just like when someone dies, you are likely to be overcome with sadness. However, the reminder of your sadness is constant every time you think about the person or hear about them or see them. If you are caring for them, this is difficult and creates, as we said, true sadness. It is such a feeling of loss that is ongoing. How to grieve someone alive. Let yourself grieve. Do not attempt to hide or suppress your grief or the situation. Just because society or your loved ones don't understand or acknowledge what you are going through, be open to sharing what you are feeling with close family friends, and don't push yourself to be someone that you're not at this time. Find other people in the same situation. Connecting with other people who are experiencing the same kind of personal loss is an invaluable resource. This can come as a support group or finding someone to speak with. Having someone who understands what it is like to be grieving someone alive will help you put your situation in perspective and help you to gain insight to the validity of your feelings. Don't forget your memories of the past. When you are experiencing unconventional or ambiguous grief, it is easy to forget why and how you once previously loved someone in the midst of their hurtful behavior. Remind yourself of the good times that you had and why you originally loved them. It is okay to cherish old memories and mourn that they are gone. Remember, the person is still there, just not at the moment, in the present. Open yourself up to change. One of the hardest parts of grieving someone alive is that you are forced to accept a changed relationship that you do not want. It may be difficult for you to look on a loved one in a different light, but you may be able to experience a rewarding relationship with them in new ways than before. Focusing on finding joy in your new relationship will help keep your mental state positive rather than gloomy. Acceptance of what is. Always remember that the illness is not the person. For many people, this is the hardest mental hurdle to overcome while grieving someone alive. Stop yourself from thinking of your loved one as the disease that they're dealing with, whether it be addiction, Alzheimer's, or depression, or any of the others that we talked about. You will still likely feel angry towards the person, but understanding what they are actually dealing with helps to process some of those feelings. All forms of grief are real, valid, and pertinent, and we need to process them in a healthy way. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you. That was an excellent presentation.
You're very welcome.
It's a challenging experience for all of us when we are living with someone who is in the dying process or is experiencing so much loss that it just, it is truly a moment that comes about as grief. There's no other way to describe it but that.
No other way to describe it.
And you know and I know enough about grief to know that some people deny it overtly.
Mm-hmm.
They just can't cope with the feelings of that come with grief.
Yes.
But you still recommend strongly that even those people should be seeking counsel about it.
Absolutely. It's so important, as we were saying, to deal with these feelings, because they are valid and they're very real. And that is one of the things that people have such a problem with, like we were saying in the presentation. How can you grieve someone that's still alive? Well, sometimes it's worse, as we see, because they're still there, just not in the present, and they're not the person that we knew. So it's really a double sadness, and you're reminded of it all the time.
Also,
and a lot of people
like what you said about each of us grieves individually,
mm-hmm.
and because of that, sometimes it takes longer for one to suffer the grief experience than another person does. And I think when you're grieving someone who's still alive,
mm-hmm.
that would be a characteristic that would cause us to grieve longer.
Totally, always.
Because they're still alive.
That is the dilemma.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that and they say in a lot of the research that I've done, that it's even more difficult, for that reason. And, the important thing is, too, especially with dementia or Alzheimer's, we need to listen to them even when they're delusional or whatever, not to agree or disagree. But the important thing is to empathize with their feelings in the moment, you know. And these are the things where we get very frustrated and angry. It's really hard to deal with someone who's delusional and you're not in reality, you know, and you're trying to get on with your life. So, but we need to empathize and then redirect, change the subject often. I mean, it's like a lot of the other things we've discussed too. But, and I think we've talked on this before about how important our body language is, you know, in our facial expressions. Because we may be trying to be positive with them when we're around them and we're grieving them and they're not that person that they were, but our facial expressions and our body language speak volumes, and they're very sensitive, obviously. I mean,
Very
it
true.
depends on what stage they're in.
We human beings express attitude very overtly with their bodies.
Yes,
There's no question.
yes, we do.
Well, again, Sharon, thank you so much today for helping us to learn more about this particular topic, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the future.
Thank you.